right, hello again. Today I wanted to discuss how I found myself in workplace danger many years ago at a place where you would not think you would have to worry about that. And that would be a big call center, a gigantic cubicle farm. So yeah, I want to start by kind of laying the groundwork for this. You kind of have to put yourself in the headspace of 90s tech world. I think now we're pretty accustomed to, if you pick up the phone and call tech support or customer service, you're going to get somebody in India. And that wasn't always the case. And in the 90s, you had all these PC manufacturers, and everybody needed a personal computer, and everybody was buying one. So you're like your Dell and Compaq and HP. Everybody was hiring for these gigantic American call centers full of people, and they needed so many people that it got to a point where you really kind of just needed a pulse and know how to turn on a computer. And if you could, pass that, then they would actually train you for like 4 weeks before sticking you on the phones. And for a lot of people, me included, that was the foot in the door to the computer industry. And so there are a lot of people my age that are in the computer industry that didn't set out to do that. Like for me, I wanted to be a football coach and English teacher, and I dropped out of college for a little bit. And within a couple of years, I was making what a coach or English teacher makes. And soon after, a lot more. So, I stuck with it. So with that in mind, there was this call center, and it was in a small town outside of Fort Worth. And they were hiring hundreds and hundreds of people all at once. And I didn't have much experience. I got the job, and so I go to start training. And I go to this place. The training is in the same place where we're going to be working. And I enter this classroom where there are about 30 or 40 people in training. And as things tend to happen, everybody kind of separated into cliques, like social cliques. And back then, if you had computer skills and no social skills, you were just fine. And so I'd say at least half of our class were hardcore nerds, like your traditional, it's where the stereotypes, the geek squad, all of that stuff came from that era of computer people. And all of those people tended to group together towards the front of the class, and they would have their discussions about Star Wars or Star Trek, and within 2 or 3 days they were bringing Magic the Gathering cards to work. And I mean, they were just so happy. They were up there together. I was cool with all those guys. I didn't really fit in with them exactly, but they were cool enough with me. And then kind of at the back of the class, you had some corporate people. A lot of them were like college students that were majoring in something completely unrelated. But if you needed extra money, you could go work at Pizza Inn for $4.25 an hour, or you could come here and get $12 an hour. And so they weren't really into the whole computer thing, but it was just the best way for them to make money. So out of that classroom, a couple of people are important to this story. And one of them is a guy, I will call him Billy, which may have actually been his name. I just can't remember for sure. And he was like the nerd of nerds. So you had the geeks that were all sitting together, and he gravitated towards their area, but he would leave like 3 spots, empty desk, between him and them, because he had absolutely no social skills and did not want to talk to anybody. And Billy, he was tall. He was very skinny, but he was very tall and kind of an imposing figure. He's about 6'4". And he had long hair, long goatee. He wore a black trench coat. Always wore a Metallica shirt, and like the old school Metallica pusshead shirts with the skull and like worms crawling through it and stuff. And he rode a motorcycle to work. And he could pass for like the singer of like Cannibal Corpse or something. But there were a couple of things about him that made me immediately pick him out as a total nerd. One is nerds will tend to make major fashion faux pas. And I'm not talking about, hey, we're all supposed to have the clothes from the latest fashion week in New York. I'm saying like major issues. And his was he wore 1983 big glasses. They're like kind of the aviator shape, but it's a lot thicker rim. And so it actually made him look very David Koresh. It was a very not stylish look for the mid 90s. And and all those the nerd guys a lot of times would make mistakes like that. So it's like, okay, this guy looks hardcore. Oh, by the way, he has a mullet. And it would be like something really obvious that you would know you shouldn't do that, and that would be their mistake. And the other thing that stuck out to me was when I would walk by his desk later when we finished training. We all use this program Winamp to listen to music, and you could always see what people are listening to, and he was always listening to Metallica. And I had listened to Metallica for a long time, and if you listen to that, there were kind of offshoots to that. You would start listening to Megadeth or Slayer or Exodus or Testament or Anthrax. He never listened to any of that. It was only Metallica, which kind of told me, you're new here, nerd. And I could easily see, he had like pock marks on his face, and I could easily see, you cut the hair, you replace the trench coat with a polo shirt and like pocket protector, you replace the pock marks with like fresh zits. That was a tuba player if I've ever seen one. This is somebody who had been picked on. So he's a nerd, but he just dressed it up to look like he's some tough guy. So there was him, and then another from the back of the room, there was these two guys, and we'll call them the Lake Highlands boys because they were from Lake Highlands. If you know anything about Dallas, that means old money, just deeply rooted, rich, generational, going back wealth. These guys were very rich, and it just exuded off of them. They had like this arrogance about them. But I actually kind of like them too, because they were really into sports. They're always making some kind of bet about the game. And they were always making some kind of sports jokes, and they would like try to, when we were trying to learn things where you have to memorize numbers, they would use like jersey numbers from Cowboys players to help them remember it. And they would be like, 34, Herschel Walker. And I'd kind of turn around and laugh. And they're like, this guy gets it, I wasn't friends with them. They didn't totally approve of me. I didn't totally approve of them. But we had some common ground. We're both sports fans. So we were cool. So we finished training. And we go out and get our cubicles. Okay, so everybody had... You're sitting at this desk all day, and you're on the phone, and you are trying to resolve these issues with people over the phone. And as soon as the call hangs up, whether they disconnect or you disconnect, the phone rings again, and you're right back on the phone. So you're just kind of trapped at this cubicle all day. So a lot of people had some kind of hobby with their hands. There's one guy who was amazing with 2 yo-yos. He would just sit there and have 2 of them going. All these tricks and stuff he would do, and probably fitting, but the Lake Highlands boys, they sat right next to each other. They're about 20, 30 feet from me, and they would play catch with a Nerf football. They sat so close together that they would actually have to spread out a little bit to make it worth doing. But they would throw the ball, and they would throw it behind their back, and they'd catch it behind their back. And they did it so often that, these guys probably had like NFL-ready hands. Like these guys they would play catch with the football all day. One day, one of them said to the other one, hey, how many interrupt requests are there in Windows? Is it 15 or 16? And one of them said 16. And when he said that, I said, Steve Pallure, Cowboys jersey number from the 80s. And they were like, yes, Steve Pallure. And from then on, we weren't friends, But what that did was it got me an invitation to be in their Nerf football catch. So now, instead of them just playing catch, we had a triangle going. And that introduced things like the no-look pass. You know, hey, I might throw to you, but I might not. And I started getting really good hands. And to this day, if I'm 50 yards away and you launch a football at me, I can catch it behind my back, all because of that job. And so we would just sit there and play catch all day. Now, Billy, the nerd of nerds, sits about 10 feet from me, straight in front of me. And one of the things that was really distinct about him is he liked to stand up while he was on the phone. And he faced directly at me. And it was really funny how he talked, because I'm sure he was just some guy from Fort Worth. But he talked like a villain in a sci-fi movie. And he actually had a really good speaking voice, but he couldn't relate to people, so he never used it other than when he was on the calls with customers, and he would be like, "Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Jones. Now click on start and go to run and type in CMD as in Charlie Mary Delta and click on OK." And he would talk like that, and Lake Highlands guys, you know, they're behind him all the time, and they're always laughing at him. And, you know, I get it, you know, but I couldn't just laugh in his face. So I would just kind of sit there and be like, all right. And it was really creepy sometimes, because he's just standing there and he's just staring in my general direction, you know, talking like he's like the Borg or something. So one day we're playing catch, and I throw the ball and it hits the corner of a cubicle and bounces up, and it lands in his cubicle under his desk. And he is on the phone with the customer, and he's like, "Mr. Johnson, let me put you on a brief hold. Thank you." And he hits the hold button, and then he looks at me. "Excuse me, please make sure that football does not enter my cubicle space again. Thank you." "Sorry, Mr. Johnson, I'm back." And I'm like, what just happened? And I look over, and the Lake Highlands guys are just dying laughing. Like, they are rolling. They're laughing so hard that just how this guy just nerded out on me. So I can't tell you if this happened immediately or if it was the next day, but soon after, one of the Lake Highlands guys started walking over to where he was behind Billy the Nerd of Nerds and started whizzing the football right by his ear and almost hitting him every time he threw it. And I wouldn't throw the ball back to him behind him, because with him facing me, that would have been a declaration of war. And I didn't really want to do that. I mean, that was just a little bit too hardcore for me. But with them behind him throwing it, he knew they were doing it, but he could at least pretend like he didn't know. And I think that his nerd tuba player energy sensed the jockness of those two and was intimidated by them and didn't want to have anything to do with them. I think he was a little bit more comfortable with kind of making it obvious that he didn't like me, even though I'm sure I had some jock energy too. But they just kept whizzing this thing right by his head. And then the inevitable thing happened. One day they threw it and hit him. And, this guy hit him in the shoulder. And what was interesting is when it hit his shoulder, it bounced over to a cubicle and then bounced back and went under his desk. So he has the ball now. Billy, the Nerd of Nerds, has control of the football. So you would think, what's he going to do? Because he's not just going to give it back. And what he did was quite surprising. He reached into his pocket. He reached down and picked up the football. And he went, whoosh, and he had a butterfly knife, like a full-length butterfly knife, highly illegal in Texas at the time. It was classified like with a switchblade, a knife you could not have possession of. Pulls that thing out, stabs the football, saws it in half, and rips it in two. Ow. Oops. And pieces of Nerf football fall all down on his cubicle, so he's probably even madder. But yeah, and then he just threw it down on the ground, and that was that. Now I looked over at the Lake Highlands guys, and they weren't laughing. They were just like, and they looked pretty angry. I didn't know exactly how to react. I was like, we're not playing around anymore. This guy just pulled out a freaking knife. So my shift was ending soon. We had kind of staggered shifts, so there were people coming in and out 24 hours a day, and I was leaving, and so I left for the day, and that was that. So yeah, I left, and then that's when it got really weird. So the next day, I come into work, and something is off about that entire place. Like, I walk in, and I didn't notice it first, but Billy's cubicle was completely empty. He was no longer an employee. And I go sit down, and we have this manager who I've hardly spoken to the whole time I've been there. And he walks over to my desk with a stack of papers, and he said, hey, and he's kind of whispering, like it was really awkward, kind of hey, these are Billy's callbacks. These are some open cases. I don't know if they're actually closed and he just didn't close them in the system, or if these people are waiting to hear from him. But can you please call these people? And I'm like, okay. And of course I'm thinking, all right, so I guess Billy doesn't work here anymore. And I'm figuring it probably has something to do with pulling a knife out at work. Maybe somebody saw it. But I noticed the Lake Highlands guys, they are being really quiet, and they're just staring at their screens, real serious, no sense of humor. Something is really off about them, and they won't even look up at me. And so I'm like, okay, this is weird. So I walk over there and tried to ask them what was going on, and they tried to act like they couldn't talk to me because they were on the phone, which is weird because they talk to me while they're on the phone all the time. You know, they would just hit the mute button. So they obviously didn't want to talk. So I was like, you know what? I don't know the manager very well, but he came to me with these callbacks. I'll just ask him. So I'm like, hey, so I guess Billy doesn't work here anymore? And he's like, you haven't heard? And I'm like, no, I just got here. And he just points at a newspaper on his desk. So I grabbed the newspaper, and it is the headline of the newspaper that a man was fired from his job, and he went home and he set his father on fire. So I go through and I read the story, and it talks about how the man was fired from his job, and he went home and he was acting very strange, and the neighbors noticed. They said he was always strange and he was very kept to himself, but he was like rolling around in the yard and acting like he was shooting at people. And the quote they said was, they asked him if everything was okay, and he said, yeah, but an alien just shot me in the butt with a laser. And they were like, okay. So I guess he had a estranged wife and son, young son, that lived in Amarillo, which is several hours away. And I guess at dinner that night, his parents sat down with him and said, hey, just so you know, I don't want you to be upset. We're going to drive out to Amarillo and visit your ex-wife and son. And this made him very mad. He walked out of the room. He walked back in and poured kerosene on his dad and lit a match. And his dad came running out of the house like a human torch. He was in the hospital with burns over 90% of his body, and they didn't think he was going to live. And that was the story in the newspaper. It went on to explain that the guy lived in his parents' attic. He had foil all over the windows. They said he was a computer guy and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God. So the next thing I noticed is there was nothing about them catching the guy. And as I started looking through there, I realized that this guy was still like at large. And I'm like, oh my God, he could like show up here. Like, actually, that would be the next logical place if he, you know. And so it ends up that we find out on TV that he's like armed and dangerous. Like, he's still like on the run. And we're like, oh my God. So a lot of us throughout the day kept walking up to the window and kind of looking around in the parking lot, like looking to see, is his motorcycle there? Is he like in one of these cars here? Is he about to come in and like shoot the place up? So we're worried about it. And then at some point that afternoon, the manager walks up and says, "Hey, good news, everybody. They caught him. He was driving out to Amarillo. They pulled him over. He's in custody. Everything's fine. So we don't have to worry about it. They've got him. So nothing to worry about." So that was that, we thought. Okay, so key details to remember. One day after he set his father on fire, our boss said that they caught him on the way to Amarillo, Texas, and that he was in custody and it's all over with. We never thought about it much again. I mean, well, we thought about it, but we didn't worry about it anymore because, obviously he's going to go to prison, all this stuff. So fast forward about 20 years. I went back to college and I was working on a business degree, and I had a human resources class where we were discussing workplace violence, workplace incidents, and things like that. And I had like a team of people I was working with, and the assignment was we were supposed to talk about incidents that we had experienced of workplace incidents like that, or anything that we'd even heard of. And like a lot of things where, especially when it would be people outside of Texas, if we would kind of swap stories, a lot of times I had started to learn that maybe I should just kind of keep my mouth shut and not chime in with my stories, because my stories were always crazier and people don't always like that. So I kind of learned to pick my spots, because nobody likes somebody who's always got a story that tops theirs. So we had this, people were coming up with their pedestrian stories about, oh yeah, this guy got mad at work and he shoved another guy. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, all right, I got one. I'm going to tell them. So it's an online class. It's in the chat room. And I explain a very brief version of the story I just told you. And nobody responded at first. And then from our continued chat, I realized that at first they thought I was kidding. And then they thought I made this up or something. And I was kind of like, hey, but I mean, that is my story. So like, are we going to use it for the assignment? And they were like, well, I mean, really, like, I would think a story like that, we would have heard about it in the news or something. And I'm like, oh my God, these guys don't believe me. So I decided, you know what? I can get receipts on this. Just for my own personal sanity, I need these people to believe my story. So I went to the newspaper website of when I had originally seen that story that was on the front page of the news. And they had a special where for 99 cents I could get access to their archives. So I get access to the archives. I look up, and it's funny because what I actually used to search and find that was an alien shot me in the butt with a laser, is what I typed in, because I knew out of everything that had to be the only time that was ever typed in that newspaper that had been around for like 150 years. And sure enough, first thing that came up, there's the story. And I get a screenshot of it and I'm like, boom, receipts, mic drop. And now once I've done that, I'm like, oh yeah, I should look up and see, like, did he go to prison? Like, what happened? So the next story I find is his father died. It took him about a week for him to actually pass away from his injuries. Next story was they captured him in Chicago a month after he set his father on fire. And I'm like, no, they captured him the next day on the way to Amarillo. And then suddenly I realized our manager lied to us so we would shut the hell up and get away from the window and get back on the phone. And for the entire next month, At any point, that guy could have showed up and shot up that place. But he went to Chicago for some reason. So, yeah, we were in danger that whole time. I found another article. He got, I want to say 40 or 50 years in prison. And, you know, I saw he got out. I don't know if he like changed his name. I don't know, but I've tried to keep a little sketchy on some of the particulars on this because I don't want this guy coming after me. I'm still scared of him. He set his dad on fire. What the heck's up with that? So anyway, yeah, that's the story of how I had a job at a cubicle farm and still think I nearly got murdered by a nerd.